Pretty well all of these paintings have started outside, and if they haven't, they've come from something that I've painted outside. The title of this exhibition is Sunlight. It came about, I was trying to see what the thing that all of these paintings had in common. So these particular paintings have come from mostly around Tasmania, the waterways, and it's been about going out and painting the landscape. But the thing that I'm looking for is that sort of contrast that direct sunlight brings. So these paintings in this show are all about that response to sunlight. I've always been drawn to the sea, so I always find myself, in fact when I go travelling, my first stop is I always go to a river, a lake or the side of the sea. I grew up in Sydney by the sea, and I was always in or around the water, so it's probably why I've had that strong connection with it. And in fact my professional working career that finished 5 years ago was as a marine biologist, so I've always had that link to the sea. One of the interesting things about this particular exhibition, we've been going to a spot at Gilston Bay along the walk there. I like structure in a painting, and the foreshore and then the boats and the reflections, they still almost build up an abstract quality to what I'm trying to do. In fact, some of the larger paintings, I started off with boats in particular parts of the composition, but finding that they weren't actually fitting properly, and so I was actually moving physically the boats in the painting. So in fact some of them disappeared and another one would appear. And anyway, it was a way of this sort of making compositional arrangements that sort of reflected what I was trying to get to. It's all about harmony of colour and form are probably the big ones, but I've also been really interested in the edges of the composition of the shapes. The sharpness of the ones forward and the softness of the shapes at their back. So it's, and Gilston Bay's been great for that because it's like a little experimental area where I can actually look at these various compositions and see how they change. So I left CSIRO 5 years ago and I've been painting full-time since. I've always exhibited as well as worked, and that always meant painting night times or weekends. Now I find that I can work a normal week in the studio or outside, and I think it's slowed me down a little bit, but enabled me to spend more time thinking, and the fact of just going to work every day, you start getting more in touch with the nuances of the material that you're using. And so now my palette has become the area that I work out a lot of the problems before I even put a brushstroke down. And I think that's been one of the big things of working full-time. I've had those extra hours to explore what I can do with colour. I grew up in Sydney and moved out here in 1984, and I've been here ever since. It's where my boys have grown up, and yeah. Ironically, some of the friends that I made in Sydney were either here or have moved here, so I still have some of my close friends from growing up in Sydney. I once actually did an exercise of writing down the artists whose work that had influenced me, and I got to 100 very quickly, because I do read a lot about art. I'm what they call self-taught, although I'm not really sure that really applies. I think painting is something you basically have to just spend time doing. But I suppose my biggest influences would be firstly the Australian painters, Roland Wakelin and Roy de Maistre. More recently, not that I paint like her, but who I love her work, is Elizabeth Cummings, a Sydney painter. And then there's that whole trove of painters that we're sort of connected to, and Bonnard jumps out as being one of the ones that I'm passionate about, and Edward Hopper taught me a lot about coastal painting just by taking his, there's a book written about him which is a soft cover, and it has his rock studies, and I always used to take that many years ago with me. Every time I went painting I would take this book about his work, because looking and turning looking into paint is actually, it's not straightforward. You know, it's sometimes the colours aren't really what you see, but they're needed to make a composition balance. Yeah, as I said, I got to 100 very quickly, and even the artist Gustav Klimt, who I thought I had nothing in common with, I suddenly discovered his large abstracts, and they sort of sent me off on a bit of a tangent just recently, looking at the way he approached water. There's a European painter, his name's Wilhelm Hammershøi, and he does these interiors in grey, and I was quite fascinated by them. They're in the Musée d'Orsay, and I thought, but I don't really have anything to do with that sort of painting. But the more I've looked at my own work, I've discovered the absolute necessity for grey as part of your palette, and it really needs to be like a primary on my palette anyway, because it's the thing that modifies the colours very well. I use these small books to make drawings of potential paintings, and sometimes I work them up. This is a bit more of a detailed drawing than I would normally make. I use wax crayons for these. It's a lesser one. Some of them are a little bit more. Where I can see possibilities for a painting, I spend more time on them. This is a painting done from Falmouth, actually. This is actually, I spent a couple of weeks in Sumatra last year. This is a place called Nias, and did quite a few drawings of possible painting areas that I ended up by turning into watercolours. This is taken last year in November. This is actually, I put myself in this one, this is actually a place called Lagundri Bay in Nias, and afternoon having a beer, watching people fishing.